This is a historic day in the history of the Middle East. The Assad regime, a central link in Iran's axis of evil, this regime has collapsed. This is a direct result of the blows we have inflicted on Iran and Hezbollah, the main supporters of the Assad regime. Together with the defense minister and with full backing from the cabinet, I directed the IDF yesterday to take control of the buffer zone and the dominant positions near it. We will not allow any hostile force to establish itself on our border.
Haven't been living under a rock, Syria has fallen. After 13 years of sectarian violence, government corruption, Western-backed jihadists trying to overthrow the Syrian government, it has finally happened early this morning. And you can already tell who's celebrating over this. The United States, Israel, and the Gulf, as well as Turkey. And I'm going to talk about these issues because we've seen this before in 2011 under an operation led by the CIA, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Let's talk about ousted Syrian leader Assad flees to Moscow at the fall of Damascus, Russian state media say. Now, I see nothing but celebration from the left, so-called progressives, right? These are the people that are basically saying, well, Israel and the United States had to do what they had to do. They had to, get rid of the brutal dictator Assad. Okay, you got rid of the brutal dictator Assad. Now you're left with the head choppers. The same people, the same ideology that gave us 9/11, the 1998 East Africa bombing, the Khobar Towers bombing, the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, the Paris attacks, San Bernardino. I can go fucking on and on. Millennium plot, Majinka plot, terrorism all around the world. Now, for those who have very short memories, that's Al Qaeda. Now we're facing a nexus of Al Qaeda, the Taliban, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Boko Haram, Tayed al-Sharam, and other Islamist groups that are now working together to create what? A caliphate, to fight against the West. So, in other words, this goes back to the original doctrine of Muhammad ibn al-Faraj in The Neglected Duty, where he outlined there were two enemies. The near enemy, which are the secular Arab governments, the far enemy, which is the West, the United States and Israel. Syria has fallen. Afghanistan is under a national caliphate of the Taliban and Al Qaeda. Libya is currently under siege by Islamists from the Islamic State and Al Qaeda. Are we in Libya? Are we in Syria? Are we in Afghanistan? No. We're in the countries that are fighting these monsters, overthrowing those Arab governments. Say what you want about Gaddafi. Say what you want about Assad. Say what you want about Saddam Hussein. Murderers. Yes. Mass murderers. But to root and celebrate as if you won something to you leftist Muslims out there, socialist Arabs, moderate Arabs, you are, right? And to the Salafi Jihadiyya. Celebrating what? That Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the leader of the Tahrir al-Sham in Syria, is all of a sudden a moderate rebel, as CNN called him recently? This is what you're rooting for? A man who killed tens of thousands of Alawites, Shia, Sufis, enslaved women in cages? That's what the Islamic State did. The Islamic State and ISIS in Khorasan in Afghanistan, they got to be celebrating. You know who's celebrating too? The Taliban in Afghanistan, Al Qaeda in Afghanistan and Iraq. Israel, the United States, Turkey, the Gulf, Qatar, Bahrain, all these countries that gave us this Salafi jihadi Islamic ideology. Backed by who? CIA money. It's not a fucking conspiracy, it's a fact. Celebrate. Tell me, how are the Libyans celebrating? Were the Syrians celebrating in Damascus when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi took over the microphone and declared himself emir of the Ummah? How safe was it? I remember seeing videos, dozens each week. Islamic State, they loved their propaganda videos, which they learned from Al Qaeda and the Haqqani network in Afghanistan, how valuable propaganda works. And they would have beheading videos, videos of people upside down getting shredded. I mean, just the worst stuff. This is who you're celebrating. Yeah? Fucking morons. Ousted Syrian leader Bashar Al Assad flew to Moscow and received asylum for his longtime ally. Russian media said Sunday, hours after a stunning rebel advance seized control of Damascus and ended his family's 50 years of iron rule. Thousands of Syrians poured into the streets, echoing with celebratory gunfire, and waved the revolutionary flag in scenes that were called the early days of the Arab Spring uprising. By the way, we saw this scenario before the fall of Saddam Hussein. What happened after that? Well, there were two civil wars. It created the vacuum for Al Qaeda in Iraq, which later became Islamic State, and then Islamic State Levant, which actually was on the verge of being destroyed. And Civil War happened. And of course, they suddenly got brand new jeeps, brand new weapons. Where that came from? And then you had Israel basically providing medical aid to al-Nusra fighters in Golan Heights hospitals because they were fighting against who? Bashir Al Assad. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And by the way, if you're rooting for Israel, or you're rooting for one of the most genocidal governments on the face of the earth, they're killing their own citizens, women and children. You don't give a shit about the fall of Assad any more than you care about the rise of Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. They're no different than those who ignore the mass executions under Assad or Saddam Hussein, who are barely even comparable to what's coming. And by the way, this also benefits the Defense Department. How? Boeing, Raytheon, LT3 Technologies are all going to be making those missiles and bombs and bullets for the next 10 years. For Iran? No. For the rebels, right? The rebels. For the jihadists. Because there's going to be a tremendous wave of terrorism that the United States will have to endure for their support of Israel and the slaughter of the Palestinian people. And you know who's going to suffer? People like us, victims of the government's nefarious activities in Israel and their immoral actions. Pieces of shit like Joe Biden, Donald Trump, John Fetterman, Nancy Pelosi, Pete Hegseth, and all the Israeli firsters in the Trump cabinet, all the Israeli firsters in the Biden cabinet, who's an avowed Zionist on his own merit, his own words. Now, we saw this plane before, where the United States was backing terrorists in Syria. And we saw this through a program. It was a covert program at the time called Timber Sycamore. And I did a video on this, and I'll read you an article that was posted by the Telegraph in 2013. For Syria rebels armed and trained by CIA on way to battlefield. And this is 2013, 11 years ago, right in the beginning stages of the Arab Civil War. Okay. And by the way, at the same time, we were supposed to be fighting the war on terrorism. It's the reason why we were in Syria in the first place. We were invited by them to fight against the Islamists. Same as Iraq and Afghanistan. The Islamists are still there. I wonder why. Because they're useful for the CIA. They're useful for the Defense Department. They're useful for the State Department to move around and use as a mercenary army against their alleged enemies. You know, countries like Syria, Libya, Iran should be our allies. Western-backed governments should be our allies, not these terrorist safe havens, not the countries that produce terrorism like Israel and Saudi Arabia. Yeah, Israel produces terrorism. They're a terrorist, psychopathic state. It's government, not the people. It's government. Two of them wanted by The Hague for war crimes. They too supported terrorist groups. They supported Hamas because they were seen as a useful ally against the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Also against the Bash and the West Bank. And as long as Hamas is there, we can only subjugate the Palestinian people in Gaza City under military occupation. What other country on the face of the earth, besides maybe North Korea, has its own military jailing its own citizens? The first cell of Syrian rebels trained and armed by the CIA is making its way to the battlefield. President Barack has reportedly told senators, here's a real piece of shit, war criminal. During a meeting at the White House, the president assured John McCain, who was a piece of garbage, rotting in hell, hopefully, that after months of delay, the U.S. was meeting its commitment to back moderate of the opposition. Yeah, moderate elements like Jabhat al-Assad, al-Shah, right? Moderate. These are head choppers. It doesn't matter, what they call themselves. They're Al-Qaeda. That's what they are. They're jihadist terrorists. And the CIA was backing them in 2013. Trump, one of the few good things he did while in office in 2017, he ended the program. But in the program, you had Israel, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Jordan backing this program, arming these people, providing training to these head choppers that were supposed to be at war under the war on terrorism. That's what Timber Sycamore was about. For those who need a wake-up call, there's a famous WikiLeaks cable from Jacob Sullivan in 2012, a year prior to the article. See last item, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Al-Qaeda is on our side. What fucking side is this? They're not on my side. We're at war with Al-Qaeda. They're the ones who perpetrated 9/11, right? They're the ones who perpetrated the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, right? They're the ones who helped precipitate the bombing of the Khobar Towers, right? And they're on our side? Fuck you. I don't want these monsters running around killing Sufis and Shia and Christians and atheists and polytheists. That's what they're doing. And you people are celebrating this fucking nonsense. Right now, there's an individual who is the former leader of the Jabhat al-Nusra named Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. Now, I'm going to play a video. This is from a Frontline episode that was based upon the interview of Abu Muhammad Jalani, who's now the face of this resistance in Syria. Meanwhile, mind you, here's a guy who's a jihadist, dedicated jihadist, still wears the beard and everything. Okay. He claims to have disassociated from ISIS. Right. He claims to have disassociated from Al Qaeda. Right. Meanwhile, his army is filled with nothing more than jihadists. And there are people that are propping this guy as the next bin Laden resistance fighter against the disastered socialists, the early dirty communists in Syria, Russian infiltrated. Oh, we got to get rid of Assad. He's a monster. Well, just watch this video.
Jalani's 10,000-plus man army, effectively backed by Turkey, is now the only thing that prevents it. There are some people in Washington who think it may be wise to work with Jalani, including a top American diplomat in the region during the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations, James Jeffrey.
Look, he's the least bad option of the various options on Idlib, which is one of the most important places in Syria, which is one of the most important places right now in the Middle East. When there is not the normal setup of nation states and of international norms and rules, you wind up with groups like this that do things you don't like, but in the here and now are the folks you have to deal with to avoid even worse things.
How can you trust somebody that's just trying to survive and continue to remain in power?
There are people that have met with Jalani who are saying we should give him a chance.
I think it's letting him and the organization off the hook.
I spent 7 days in Idlib, seeing, of course, what Jalani wanted me to see, and hearing what he wanted me to hear. I also spoke to his critics and his victims.
Jalani told me that we don't torture. There is no torture in our prisons.
That's a difficult one to believe. I mean, we have testimony that says otherwise.
هناك تعذيب وهناك تعذيب وحشي وهناك أساليب همجية جدا في التعامل بهؤلاء المجرمين الإرهابيين.
Jalani, they say, is a man that can't be trusted. I've come here to investigate.
So that's who the United States is propping up. A terrorist who was one of the world's most wanted, according to the United States. A dangerous terrorist. Now he's a freedom fighter. He's one of us. He's on our side. And the nerve of some of you people to have this short-term memory loss. Oh, the worst of it is we got to get rid of him, and we got to use jihadists to get rid of him so that we could save the country from his brutal rule, which is now under the ruling of a terrorist who has killed tens of thousands of Muslims for not being of the right sect. This is what some of you Arabs are celebrating. Never mind the neocons, never mind the religious evangelical fundamentalists celebrating this. Washington Post, CNN, calling Jalani a reformed rebel, a fucking mass murderer. This is what it's come down to. So now, with the fall of Syria, we also see the nexus of Iran and Hezbollah broken, because without the conduit, Iran has no help between Lebanon and Syria. Now, I made videos 2 years ago suggesting that this might be the ultimate goal of Israel, is to break the nexus. In order to do that, they need to break Syria. Well, here it is. It's not a conspiracy, ladies and gentlemen. Just read the Oded Yanon plan. Read the Hannibal Directive. Read just about every U.S. foreign policy guideline, whether it's from the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, foreign policy planners were hoping for this to happen, and now it's happened. And now Iran's the only one that stands in the way for them. Now that's going to cost the United States. And then what? Does Israel basically say, now we're the beacon of the Middle East? No. What's going to happen is once Iran is defeated, and it's going to take years to defeat them, we'll go back to fighting the very people who were supporting Al-Qaeda. And why not? They got billions of dollars of weapons in Afghanistan. They're a much bigger group than they ever were under bin Laden. And now they have Libya and Syria and parts of Iraq and North Africa. Be careful what you wish for. To you who celebrate the fall of Assad. Because the very people that you're supporting are going to be the enemies in your future.